My name is Mike Haigh, and I'm the project director of Wreck Hunters, which is a new scuba diver training operation teaching divers diving archaeology in the clear, beautiful waters of the Caribbean. Like so many people of my generation, I think it was the films of Jacques Cousteau and his titanium tanks diving into the Red Sea with his dive team and all over the world that first attracted me to the fantastic underwater realm. When I was young, my parents had caravans in the south of France, which they ran as a business. And at the end of each year, we used to go down basically to clean them up and close them down for the winter. And it was there that I was introduced to the fantastic world of snorkeling around the headlands of Saint-Tropez and Senegal. And naturally, that led to an interest in taking the matter further. I remember doing my first diving course at a Youth Hostel Association's diving area down in Salcombe in Devon. I got this for my 18th birthday. It was a fantastic week. I don't remember my first dive terribly much, but I do remember my first wreck dive, and that was on the Hercian Cecile, a popular dive even to today. I remember seeing the skeletal remains of that wreck and being so impressed by it. At the end of the week, I was very lucky because the instructor took us around the corner to a place called Moor Sands, where some divers were working on a Bronze Age site. And I expect that's what started my whole interest in diving archaeology, which obviously I took on to other things later on in life. Well, I think two really stand out. The first was when we were working on an Etruscan wreck, 600 BC, on an island called Giulio, just off the west coast of Italy. And what we worked on was a very deep wreck, or was partly a very deep wreck. We were diving to 50 metres twice a day, doing 50 minutes decompression. And this was the day before computers, so all this was on tables. So this is very tough diving indeed. But the director's idea was that the best stuff, the heaviest stuff, would probably be at the bottom of the site, and that was about 50 metres. And after many years of working down there with teams of divers, we actually came across the keel of this boat. Now, a keel of a boat 2,500 years old is pretty incredible, and for me that was just a fantastic find in itself. The other one that really stands out is completely different. It was when I was working on the Stadland Bay Wreck, which is just outside Poole in Dorset, a medieval wreck. And I was then very involved in underwater photography. And I developed a particular ability to do photomosaics. Now, as you and many people know, the visibility in Poole Bay is not particularly great. Normally, the best you get is about 2 metres. So when you've got a piece of wreck about 23 metres by 5 metres across, it's going to be a little challenging to do a photomosaic. But I thought it was possible, and myself and a hell of a lot of people put together a system to do this. Now, a lot of people said it couldn't be done. And every time I heard this, I was reminded of the words of Barnes Wallis, the guy who invented the bouncing bomb. And what Barnes Wallis said was that the more criticism he got, it allowed him to perfect his plans even to a better degree. And he said that half the joy in life is not in the achievement, but in the fight, in the process of getting there. So in the end, I did the photomosaic. It came out well. And that, to me, is the best bit of work I've ever done in underwater photography, certainly, and would be the second thing that stands out from the things that I've been involved in diving archaeology. Well, I think the most memorable find from a site I've been involved in was the Giulio Tuscan wreck. Now, the find, which I'm about to talk about, we did not discover. It was discovered back in 1961. By a group of divers who were actually working with Reg Valentine, one of the founding members of the BSAC. Now, they were diving in a little bay, which came to be known as the Giulio wreck, and they were there because the weather was bad. But they went down, and one of the divers came across a large, what looked like a large cannonball, effectively, and brought it to the surface. And what this was actually a Greek Corinthian helmet, the type of thing that the Greek warriors would have worn at the Battle of Troy. You can actually call it the helmet of Achilles. Now, the German diver took it home with him. He cleaned it up, And years later, Menson Band, the director of the project, managed to track this helmet down and got some pictures. Now, unfortunately, the helmet itself is lost. It's probably in a private collection. But at least we have the pictures of this incredible object, and that's probably the most amazing thing that I've ever seen come out of a diving archaeology project. It truly was the helmet of Achilles. But on the same site, many years later, when I was working on it, I found something which was quite interesting. Now, as I said earlier, most of the diving there I was doing was down at 50 metres, because that's where it was felt to be most appropriate to be if you were a reasonable diver doing that type of work. But towards the end of my stay, it was decided sensibly that if I was going to fly back, I should do some shallower diving. And I did a dive to 26 metres, which I still remember clearly to this day. And in this little gully that I was working on, I came across a pot. And in this pot, there were some olive pips. So this was obviously evidence that this was olives had been transported on this vessel. Now, this may sound not very exciting, but actually, up until that time, it was felt that the olives didn't come in from Greece to Italy until about 400 BC, whereas in fact this wreck is dated to about 600 BC. So in some small way, I managed to rewrite history with that dive. Well, that's a really interesting question, especially at this present time with obviously the economic problems which are being produced by the pandemic. So diving archaeology is really interesting from that point of view, because if we talk about the economy and the economic effects of these present events, economic growth, which is what many people seem to be quite obsessed with, is a result of productivity growth and growth in populations. Largely, that's the formula they use. But that misses out one key element. The key element is trade. You've got to have trade between countries for any of this to work in the modern world anyway. And of course, before the invention of the commercial aircraft, the only way to really move large amounts of material around the world was by ship, by vessel. And so diving archaeology, which often is involved in the interpretation and recovery of these ancient vessels, tells us about how trade was going on, for a long, long time back, and how critically important it is to human beings to have this trade going on. So the study of this trade, of this work in the past, and how people interacted, is really quite important for us to understand and to be aware of how critically important the interaction between human communities is at all times. It is really this sort of interesting story where we look back and see how things have worked for us, and look forward to try and avoid the pitfalls. So all the time we are looking at wreck sites, we are reinterpreting wreck sites, we are seeing how important trade was, and we are seeing how important trade was really quite a long time back before we thought it was a critical area. We also see that in times of where there has been political problems between countries, that trade has carried on. So it's a really important lesson for us to learn on a general basis, but also because, of course, specifically people are very interested in their past, and the ships are ships which were probably some of the most complex objects mankind ever made, tell us all about their interaction. Well, yes, I have indeed logged thousands of dives, and like many divers, done more dives than I have actually logged. But the one that stands out for me above all is a dive that was achieved many years ago and planned many years ago, which was a night dive on the M2 Submarine, which is out of Portland. Now, many people at the time thought this was a fairly crazy idea. And in fact, it would have been a crazy idea had it not been for the fact that we had the best skipper I think I've ever dived with, a guy called Andy Smith, who ran a boat called Skin Deep out of Weymouth. So we picked a team of very good divers with very good preparation, and on a Sunday evening in the summer we went out and we dived the M2 at night. I remember going to dive very clearly. I was part of the first pair down. We went down the shot line, we tied her on, explored the wreck. There was a huge conger in the hangar just waiting for us. Lots of fish life. Coming up, it was that time of year, so we had phosphorescence bursting around us. All divers completed the dive safely. The dive was a great success, and that's, for me, is the standout dive and the dive I'm proudest of having planned and achieved. What's the trickiest dive I've ever had? I think that's pretty clear. And I remember it well because it was my birthday back in 1988, and it was actually approximately 10 years since I started diving. And we were working on an island called Panarea, and we were looking for some wrecks. And we were diving with some Italian divers. On this project, I was actually the chief diver, of a couple of chief divers. And also on that day, I was actually the standby diver. So we put a couple of Italian divers down to look for this site. Normally we would have put down a bottle as a decompression bottle, but because they were free swimming, we couldn't do that. And after about 20 minutes, one of the divers hit the surface, gave the distress signal and vanished. So my boat handler had me across there in seconds. Being a standby diver, you're fully geared up, ready to go. And down I went. So I found both the divers. One was in quite a bit of distress because he ran out of air, and the other guy seemed to be okay, and he was actually hovering a little distance away. So this was the days before octopus rigs. Didn't have that luxury. So we did what was called buddy breathing to the surface. Now, apart from the fact that he didn't have any air, he seemed to be perfectly okay. So we put a new set on him, a tank, and took him down again to do his decompression. So having settled him down, I then went off to find the other guy, who was still hanging on to 40 metres of polypropylene rope. So I brought him back to the surface, managed to get hold of the polypropylene, put a float on it to stop it floating around the Mediterranean, and we recovered both divers, and all was fine. So there were no casualties, apart from my watch, which in all the excitement and sort of bashing around came off. Oddly enough, 3 dives later, the last dive on the site, whilst we were decompressing, my buddy fumbled around in his BCD pocket and produced my watch, which he'd found sitting 40 metres down in the neck of an amphora. So recovering 2 divers, one was out of air, dealing with 40 metres of polypropylene rope, yes, that's the trickiest dive I've ever been involved in. Back in 1985, I was involved in a project for the University of Bristol, which was a student-based project down in Sicily. Because it was university-based, most of the people that came in it were from universities, both Bristol and some other ones. And their training had been, good, but basic. So when we got down to actually want to work on a site, it involved me doing a lot of training for these people. So when I came back to the UK, this kind of carried on. And I eventually became a club instructor for the British Tobacco Club, and then became an advanced instructor for the British Tobacco Club. Then when Paddy came along, I did a crossover course to Paddy, and then I became involved a little bit with handicapped diving, and did a course with the Handicapped Scuba Association. Diving instruction involves quite a lot of theory and practical work, but it's really good for keeping your skills up to date. And so addicted am I to getting diving instructing qualifications that at present I'm actually doing a crossover course with the Scuba Schools International operation, so I can hone my skills up with that particular organisation as well. Well, the wreck of the Oliver has a great history behind it. She was discovered in 1970 by an operation called Fathom 2, who are a treasure-seeking operation that were working down in the Caribbean. They worked over a number of years, and actually were successful in finding some wrecks, but often they weren't. And a chap called Gunter Kordowski was involved in this operation to Utila. And when the Oliver was discovered and worked on for about 6 months, most people left because there was no treasure to be found. She wasn't carrying anything of value. But Gunter stayed. And I first went to Utila in 2005. And we chatted then, and I kept going back to Utila. And every time I went back to Utila, I kept chatting with Gunter. Eventually I started to dive with him, and Gunter's one of the old school deep air divers, as I can sometimes be. And over time I gained his confidence, and he started to let me know more and more about the Oliver, showed me more and more material. And eventually we went and dived the Oliver again. She hadn't been dived for 50 years or so. And what was incredible to me was we had a fantastic wreck site, well-preserved wreck site, very shallow water, perfect, in fact, for training people in the skill of diving archaeology. And I've never come across a site like this anywhere in the world. And with guns are still there and able to tell us a bit about history, that's why this is such a fantastic opportunity for people to choose this site to run this type of course. The thing about Giulio is that because she's in the tropics but not in the hurricane belt, the water temperature is 30 degrees all the time, as is the air temperature. So there's no stress. I mean, the thing about diving, teaching diving in a real situation is in the UK particularly. Obviously, we're dealing with cold water, we're dealing with tides, we're dealing with often bad weather. Giulio is lucky in that it avoids most of those problems. Therefore, you have a kind of a stress-free environment in which to teach people all these skills. So we can get a lot more done in an hour's dive than you can in another situation. So this gives us the opportunity to really hone people's skills and build on that knowledge day after day, week after week, in a really great environment, which I say is not something which you would get anywhere else that I know of. It's a good question about the academic background needed to do a diving archaeology course or not. The reality is that diving archaeology is for divers that want to take an interest in the past or have an interest in the past. There's an old saying that it's much easier to teach a diver to do archaeology than it is to teach an archaeologist to do diving. And that's very true. What we find, people who are competent divers, who have practical skills, are ideally suited for this, and they can learn the skills of diving archaeology pretty easily, and we've been doing it for a long time. There was actually a joke in diving archaeology about how many diving archaeologists you need to run a site. The answer is one. What you actually need is a whole host of other people that can fix things, take photographs, draw, and medic's quite handy, as someone who can cook. So it's really about divers getting involved in another practical set of skills. And if we look at the whole history of diving archaeology, it's all about amateurs working. The Mary Rose would be sitting at the bottom of the Solent to this day if it hadn't been for the hundreds of amateur divers that had come along and helped on that project. Every single project I've been involved with has involved far more divers than it has archaeologists. So it really is an area where, this is for divers. This is really for divers. And it's also for people, what we call pioneers. Back in the first, in Bristol, where we are now, the first ever diving archaeology conference took place in 1971, what was then called the Colston Hall. And in those days, there were no professional archaeologists. They were all amateurs, keen amateurs. These were the pioneers. These were the people, with the passion and the sort of the sort of glaze in their eyes to do whatever it took to get into this sort of work. And that's kind of the people we're looking for to get involved in this. So people who can learn this and then take that on to. So if they found a wreck themselves and their friends, that when they haven't done our course, they could do a really good job on it. That's what Wreck Hunters is all about.